What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a thoughtful conversation about his latest project, only to be asked a question that changes the mood of the entire panel? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience applauds as James McAvoy walks onto the stage with a smile, greeting each member of the panel before taking his seat. Whoopi Goldberg welcomes him warmly. Whoopi says, "James, it's great to have you here. You've played so many unforgettable characters over the years, and every time we watch you, you disappear into the role." James smiles. "That's very kind. Thank you for having me." Joy Behar laughs. "You've made audiences love you, fear you, and question your sanity in some of those films." The audience laughs. James grins, hopefully only on screen. Sunny Hostin joins in. "Your newest project has people talking because it explores complicated human emotions. Was that something that attracted you?" James nods thoughtfully. "I've always believed people are more interesting when they aren't perfect. Real people make mistakes, they struggle, and they change. That's what keeps acting exciting." The audience applauds. Alyssa Farah Griffin says, "That honesty comes across in your performances." James thanks her before Whoopi continues. "You've been in this industry for a long time now. Hollywood has changed so much. Conversations are different. Audiences expect different things. Do you feel actors have to be more careful than ever?" James pauses for a moment. "I think everyone should be thoughtful with their words. But I also think we shouldn't become so afraid of making mistakes that we stop having conversations." Several audience members clap. Joy nods slightly. "So you're saying people should be allowed to disagree without immediately becoming enemies?" "I think disagreement can actually be healthy," James replies, "as long as it's respectful." Whoopi smiles. "That's easier said than done on television." The audience laughs again. James chuckles. "I imagine it is." For several minutes, the conversation remains light. They discuss filming, traveling, Scottish culture, and how James balances work with family life. The atmosphere is relaxed. The audience enjoys the jokes. Even Joy, who usually challenges guests, seems content to let James tell stories about awkward auditions and memorable filming experiences. Then Whoopi glances down at her notes. Her expression changes just enough for the audience to notice. She looks back at James. "I want to ask you something that's a little more serious." The audience grows noticeably quieter. James nods. "Of course." Whoopi folds her hands together. "Actors today often speak about social issues, politics, and public responsibility. Some people appreciate it. Others think entertainers should simply entertain." James listens carefully. Whoopi continues. "Do you believe celebrities have a responsibility to speak out, even if they risk dividing their audience?" James doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he thinks for several seconds. "I don't believe responsibility looks the same for everyone." Sunny leans forward. "What do you mean?" "I think some people are incredibly informed and can genuinely contribute to public conversations. Others should recognize when they don't know enough." Joy raises an eyebrow. "So sometimes celebrities should stay quiet?" James smiles politely. "Sometimes everyone should stay quiet until they've listened." A ripple of applause spreads across the audience. Joy notices it. "That's an interesting answer." James nods. "I've learned more from listening than talking." Whoopi watches him carefully. "But doesn't silence sometimes allow problems to continue?" James considers the question. "It can. So where's the balance?" Whoopi asks. "I think the balance comes from speaking because you genuinely care, not because people expect you to." The audience applauds again. Sunny nods thoughtfully. "I can respect that." Joy isn't fully convinced. "But there are moments when public figures have enormous influence." "They do," James agrees. "So shouldn't they use it?" James answers calmly. "I think influence is something to be handled carefully. Once people start believing every opinion they have deserves a microphone, conversations become performances instead of discussions." The audience reacts with a mix of applause and quiet murmurs. Joy smiles slightly. "That's a bold statement." James shrugs. "I don't mean it as criticism. I include myself in that." Whoopi studies him. "You've obviously spent time thinking about this." "I have." There is another brief pause. Whoopi looks down once more before asking the question that immediately changes the atmosphere. "James, have you ever felt pressured to give an answer you didn't actually believe because you knew people expected it?" The audience suddenly becomes silent. James blinks. He wasn't expecting that question. Joy looks toward Whoopi. Sunny watches James closely. Even Alyssa shifts slightly in her chair. James takes a slow breath. I've certainly felt pressure. Whoopi waits. James continues. I think everyone in public life feels it. But have you ever answered a question differently because of that pressure? Whoopi asks. James looks around the table. His smile fades. He chooses his words carefully. There have been moments where I wondered whether honesty would create more headlines than understanding. The audience murmurs quietly. Whoopi doesn't interrupt. James continues. And when interviews become about headlines instead of conversations, everyone loses. The room falls silent once again. Joy leans back in her chair. Sunny exchanges a quick glance with Alyssa. Whoopi simply nods. You know, that's not the answer I expected. James smiles gently. I figured it probably wasn't. The audience laughs softly, but the tension remains. Everyone can sense that the conversation is about to become much more personal. The audience's laughter fades, and for a moment the studio is unusually quiet. Whoopi looks directly at James McAvoy before speaking again. I want to stay with that thought, she says. You mentioned interviews becoming about headlines instead of conversations. Do you think television contributes to that? James smiles politely. I think television reflects people. Sometimes we want thoughtful discussions. Other times we want quick answers that fit into a short clip. Joy Behar jumps in. But isn't that the reality of live TV? We don't always have an hour to unpack every opinion. That's true, James replies. I don't blame anyone for that. I just think complicated questions deserve complicated answers. Several audience members applaud. Sunny Hostin nods. I actually appreciate that because a lot of issues don't have simple solutions. James agrees. Exactly. Sometimes saying, I don't know, is a more honest answer than pretending you're certain. The audience applauds again. Alyssa Farah Griffin leans forward. Do you think people are afraid to say that now? James thinks for a second. I think people worry that uncertainty will be mistaken for weakness. Joy responds quickly. Politics certainly doesn't reward uncertainty. The audience laughs. James chuckles. Neither does social media. That line earns another round of applause. Whoopi smiles. Now that's something everyone understands. She glances toward the audience before turning back to James. You've worked with people from all over the world. Different cultures. Different opinions. Has that changed the way you approach disagreement? It definitely has, James says. I've learned that two intelligent people can look at the same situation and honestly reach different conclusions. Sunny nods. And that's okay? I think it has to be. Joy crosses her arms. But what happens when one side is clearly wrong? James pauses. I think there are situations where facts matter enormously. But even then, shouting rarely changes minds. The audience murmurs. Whoopi watches him carefully. So your answer is more listening? James smiles. It's harder than talking. The audience laughs softly. Joy grins. I'll admit that. Everyone laughs, easing the tension for a moment. Whoopi smiles too. See, we can still laugh. Then her expression becomes more serious. But let me ask you something personal. James nods. Go ahead. Have you ever walked away from an interview thinking, they didn't hear what I actually meant? James laughs quietly. More than once. The audience laughs with him. What happened? Sunny asks. James shrugs. I'd spend 15 minutes explaining something, and the only sentence anyone remembered was one line taken completely out of context. Joy nods knowingly. Welcome to television. The audience laughs again. James continues. I don't even think it's always intentional. Short clips spread faster than long conversations. Whoopi looks thoughtful. So does that make celebrities more guarded? It can. In what way? Alyssa asks. You start wondering which sentence will become tomorrow's headline. The audience grows quiet again. James continues calmly. That's not a healthy way to communicate. Sunny responds. I understand that. Context matters. It really does. Joy raises another question. But people also expect authenticity. They should, James says. So how do you stay authentic? James smiles. By accepting that not everyone is going to agree with you. Several audience members clap. Whoopi nods slowly. That's easier said than done. James laughs. It definitely is. The conversation seems to settle again until Joy asks another question. Can I push back on something? James smiles. Please. You've talked about listening, understanding, and nuance. But there are times when people want someone with influence to clearly take a side. James nods respectfully. I understand that. So why hesitate? James answers without raising his voice. Because I think people deserve honesty instead of performance. The audience becomes very quiet. Joy watches him closely. What do you mean by performance? James chooses his words carefully. I think sometimes public figures feel pressure to say exactly what they believe people want to hear. Sunny immediately asks, "Are you saying that happens often?" James pauses. I think it happens more than people realize. The audience reacts with a mixture of applause and murmurs. Whoopi folds her hands together. That's a strong statement. James nods. I don't mean everyone, but I think the pressure exists. Joy glances toward the audience. So you're saying authenticity sometimes loses to popularity? James gives a small smile. I think that's a temptation in every profession, not just entertainment. The audience applauds. Sunny smiles slightly. I actually think that's a fair point. Whoopi notices the reaction from the audience. You know what's interesting? James looks at her. Go on. Nobody here has applauded because you've picked a side. James nods. They're applauding because they're hearing something they feel is honest. The audience responds with another round of applause. James thanks them with a small wave. Whoopi smiles. I have one more question before we head to break. James nods. I'm listening. She looks him directly in the eye. If a young actor came to you today and asked, how do I survive this industry without pretending to be someone I'm not? What would you tell them? James doesn't answer immediately. The audience waits. Even Joy remains silent. Finally, James says quietly, I'd tell them that careers come and go. Headlines come and go. Public opinion changes every day. He pauses. But if you start saying things you don't believe just because they're popular, eventually you won't recognize your own voice. The studio falls completely silent. A few audience members begin applauding. Within seconds, the entire audience is on its feet. Whoopi watches the standing ovation before looking back at James with a thoughtful expression. As the applause slowly settles, she takes a breath and says, That's probably one of the most honest answers we've heard at this table in a long time. The cameras capture the reactions around the panel as the discussion prepares to continue after the break, with everyone sensing that the conversation has become much deeper than anyone expected. As the show returns from the commercial break, the audience applauds once again. The atmosphere feels noticeably different. The earlier laughter has given way to a more thoughtful mood, and even the panelists seem eager to continue where they left off. Whoopi smiles at the camera. Welcome back. We're still here with James McAvoy, and before the break, we were having a conversation that clearly struck a chord with our audience. The audience applauds. Whoopi turns back to James. I've been thinking about something you said. You mentioned that people can lose their own voice if they spend too much time trying to please everyone. Do you think that's becoming more common? James nods. I do. Not because people are dishonest, but because the pressure is constant. Every interview, every public appearance, every social media post, someone is going to judge it. Sunny Hostin adds, and those judgments can be immediate. Exactly, James replies. Sometimes before you've even finished explaining yourself. Joy Behar smiles. So the internet doesn't exactly reward patience. The audience laughs. James laughs too. I don't think patience is trending. That earns another round of laughter and applause. Alyssa Farah Griffin leans in. Has there ever been a moment when you decided not to answer a question because you felt it was impossible to answer fairly? James thinks for a moment. Yes. The audience grows quiet. There have been interviews where I realized the question wasn't really looking for an answer. It was looking for a headline. Whoopi nods slowly. How do you know the difference? James replies calmly. When someone is interested in understanding you, they'll usually let you finish. When they're interested in a headline, they're already thinking about the next question before you've answered the first. The audience murmurs in agreement. Sunny says, That's an interesting observation. Joy looks at Whoopi with a smile. I hope he's not talking about us. The audience laughs. James quickly smiles. Not today. Everyone laughs, including Whoopi. She responds, good save. The audience applauds. Whoopi then becomes serious again. You've always had a reputation for being thoughtful. But does that ever frustrate people? Do they expect a simpler answer than you're willing to give? James nods. I think sometimes people mistake simplicity for clarity. Real life usually isn't simple. Sunny agrees. I've practiced law. Very few situations are black and white. James smiles. Exactly. Joy raises another point. But television often asks people to choose one side or the other. It does, James says. And sometimes that's appropriate. Other times, it's more honest to admit that you're still learning. The audience applauds again. Whoopi glances toward the audience. I think that's one reason today's conversation has connected with people. James thanks her. Then Whoopi asks the question that shifts the discussion once again. If you could change one thing about celebrity interviews, what would it be? James takes a slow breath. I'd replace the idea of winning with the idea of understanding. Joy tilts her head. What do you mean by winning? James answers carefully. Sometimes interviews are treated like debates where someone has to come out on top. I'd rather leave a conversation feeling that both people learned something. Sunny nods. I like that. The audience applauds. Alyssa smiles. So you don't see disagreement as failure? Not at all. James continues. If everyone in a room agrees on every topic, then someone probably isn't being completely honest. The audience reacts with another wave of applause. Joy laughs. Well, nobody has ever accused this table of agreeing on everything. Everyone laughs. Whoopi smiles. That's definitely true. The laughter settles before Whoopi asks one final question. James, after everything we've discussed today, what do you hope people remember from this conversation? James looks around the table before answering. I hope they remember that listening isn't weakness. The audience becomes very quiet. I hope they remember that changing your mind after hearing someone else's perspective isn't losing, it's growing. Several audience members begin applauding. James continues. And I hope people stop assuming that disagreement automatically means disrespect. The applause grows louder. Whoopi smiles warmly. I think that's a message a lot of people needed to hear. Joy nods in agreement. I may not agree with every word you've said today. The audience laughs. But I respect the way you've said it. James smiles. I appreciate that. Sunny adds. That's what good conversations are supposed to look like. The audience applauds once more. As the applause continues, Whoopi looks toward the camera. We've had actors, authors, politicians, and activists sit at this table over the years. Every guest brings something different. Today's conversation reminded us that respectful disagreement is still possible. James thanks each panelist individually before shaking hands across the table. The audience rises for another standing ovation as the cameras slowly pull back, with everyone smiling after a discussion that challenged opinions without turning into personal attacks. Whoopi laughs as the applause continues. I have a feeling people are going to be talking about this one for a while. James smiles. I hope they're talking to each other, not just about us. That final remark draws one more round of applause as the show prepares to move into its closing segment, leaving both the audience and the panel reflecting on a conversation that had become far more meaningful than anyone expected when it began. As the closing music begins to play, the audience is still applauding. The energy in the studio is different from the start of the interview. Instead of reacting to a dramatic confrontation, people are talking quietly among themselves, reflecting on the discussion they have just witnessed. Whoopi Goldberg smiles at James McAvoy before turning to the audience. You know, every once in a while we have a conversation that reminds us why this table exists. We don't all have to agree, but we should be willing to listen. The audience applauds. James nods appreciatively. Thank you for having me. I genuinely enjoyed the conversation. Joy Behar smiles. I asked a few tough questions. James laughs. You did. And you didn't run away. The audience laughs along. I've learned that the best conversations usually begin with difficult questions, James replies. Sunny Hostin nods. I think viewers are going to take a lot away from today's discussion. Alyssa Farah Griffin agrees. We covered acting, public responsibility, media, and communication, all in one interview. James smiles. I suppose that's what happens when nobody is afraid to ask honest questions. Whoopi stands and shakes James's hand as the audience gives one final round of applause. James McAvoy, everyone. The cameras follow James as he waves to the audience before walking backstage. The show moves on to its final segment, but the discussion continues among audience members even after the cameras stop rolling. Backstage, several production staff members thank James for taking the time to engage with every question thoughtfully. The panelists exchange a few words with him before he leaves the studio, and the mood remains warm and respectful despite the challenging topics that were discussed. Within an hour of the broadcast ending, clips from the interview begin circulating across social media. Viewers share different moments from the conversation, especially James's comments about listening before speaking and valuing honest discussion over chasing headlines. Some viewers praise his calm approach under pressure. Others debate whether they agree with every point he made. Many comment that they appreciated seeing a guest answer difficult questions without becoming defensive. Fans post messages saying the interview felt like a genuine conversation rather than an argument. Others compliment the panel for allowing space for thoughtful answers instead of rushing through the discussion. Entertainment blogs begin writing articles highlighting the interview, describing it as one of the day's most talked about television moments. Online discussions continue throughout the evening, with viewers quoting different parts of the conversation and debating the ideas raised during the show. The fictional interview becomes a trending topic among fans of daytime television, with many saying they would like to see more conversations that focus on respectful disagreement instead of shouting matches. By the following morning, the discussion is still continuing online. Some viewers believe James handled every question perfectly. Others feel the panel challenged him in all the right ways. Despite differing opinions, one thing most people seem to agree on is that the conversation encouraged people to think rather than simply choose sides. As the episode comes to a close, the narrator addresses the viewers. If you enjoyed this talk show story, we'd love to hear what you think. Do you think James handled the tough questions well? Which moment stood out to you the most? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more talk show stories.